Need a new car? The Society of St. Vincent de Paul is hosting a car raffle fundraiser to raise money for their Madison food pantry, pharmacy, micro-lending program, and other services that help local families. That's right, you can buy tickets now for a chance to win one of 5 brand new vehicles. They've got 2026 Hondas, Nissans, and one Mazda. Tickets are $100 each and only 5,000 will be sold. Find more details on the cars and buy tickets at svdpmadison.org/raffle. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, looking at the state of the race for 2 big-ticket elections this year, the Wisconsin governor's race and local to Madison Assembly District 76, who will replace current Representative Francesca Hong. Joining me first up is Dan Schaefer, longtime Wisconsin journalist and founder of the Recombobulation Area, an opinion column and online publication. Dan, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So stoked to have you here. Longtime fan of yours. Really appreciate you making the time. Believe it or not, Wisconsin's partisan primary is now less than 2 months away, which I know you know well and good. This is the race that will determine which candidates will face off in the general election this November. Dan, you're with us today to help us, in your words, recombobulate. So let's do it.
That's right. We've got such a discombobulating politics in Wisconsin. We all need a place to recombobulate.
Yes. So how would you describe the overall temperature of the race at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's at a really interesting point now in the Democratic primary and the race for governor. Like you said, we're less than 2 months away. There was just the Democratic Party of Wisconsin's convention was recently held. And so I think we're getting into the stretch run. We're getting into crunch time. Some candidates are starting to go up with TV ads. Other candidates have, some outside groups doing some spending on some ads as well. And so I think it's going to get silly. It's going to get chaotic. It's going to get, frankly, rather discombobulating over the next couple months here. But, it's a really, really fascinating race. It's a big field. 7 candidates for the Democratic primary will be on the ballot. And I think, we've seen as of late kind of a top 3 emerging in the race in a certain sense. But I still think, it could be anybody's ball game with how big this field is.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into just that because it's felt like a little bit tame so far, but now it's feeling real. It's starting to get real after the candidates got their nomination papers in. So let's focus in further on the Democratic primary candidate specifically, because that's the most contested part of the race. Recently, candidates really made their pitches at the Wisconsin Democratic Convention. Can you talk about how things are heating up just from that convention? What were the highlights and standouts for folks?
Well, I unfortunately was not able to be there in person at the convention, but I did, watch the speeches on Wisconsin Eye and follow along and talk to folks and whatever.
That's frankly quite enough. You've done your research.
I do try to be prepared, even though I wasn't able to be there last weekend. I had concert tickets that I just decided to go to the show. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that a lot of folks had coming out of that primary was about the WisPolitics straw poll. And so they do these straw polls at every state party convention when there is, kind of an upcoming primary. And I think with this one, we saw the results unfold with Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez essentially winning that straw poll. Fairly strong showings as well from Francesca Hong and from Kelda Roys. And I think it was one of the surprises from that was that Mandela Barnes, the former lieutenant governor who ran for U.S. Senate in 2022, he came in 6th out of 7 in that straw poll, which, again, this is a poll of folks who were in Madison for a convention, the party insiders, delegates who might be traveling from around the state with their county parties and delegations and whatnot. But I thought it was rather interesting that Barnes was lower in the field. And I think it also capped off what has turned out to be a pretty good week for Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez. I reported on a poll that I had obtained that showed her kind of on the rise, in a top 3, along with Mandela Barnes and Francesca Hong in the overall primary. And I think Rodriguez poised to pick up some support as voters continue to make their decision. The number of undecided voters is on the decline. And I think also Mandela Barnes's numbers overall have been a little bit on the decline. He came into this race with by far the highest name ID of any candidate, having run statewide in the fairly recent past. But as this race has unfolded, the momentum, has, I think in the polling memo, at least that I saw, it characterized his campaign as stalling. And so, it gives an opportunity for some of these other candidates to rise in the polls. And I think Sarah Rodriguez is at least seeing some of that happening right now. Remains to be seen if she'll continue to consolidate some support as this race unfolds. But I think, if you're doing the arrow up, arrow down, whatever type of look at where some of the candidates are, I think it's been a little bit of a stall decline scenario for Mandela Barnes. And I think Sarah Rodriguez has been on a bit of an upswing.
It is so interesting because I feel like every time I tap in and try and figure out who's leading, it felt like anyone's guess is as good as mine. At this point, seeing that poll, it just makes me wonder, how important are the polls at this time? How much weight do we give to this poll? Are there other polls that are coming down the line that might be even more significant? How do you track polling and the weight that you give to it?
Yeah, I think, it's all in a lot of ways a case by case basis. And you got to really make sure that, because there's a lot of nonsense out there. So you got to verify and make sure that the polls are valid and they're not skewed in a certain way and whatnot. But there really hasn't been that much public polling on this race. I know that all the campaigns will have their internal polls, like the one from Sarah Rodriguez campaign that I reported on a couple weeks ago. But there has not been that much public polling. The Marquette University Law School poll is, of course, the gold standard poll for any of these campaigns in Wisconsin. They haven't run a poll on this race since before the spring election in April.
Why do you think that is?
They have their own schedule. I'm not one to question it. I know they have. I'm sure they will be polling the governor's primary in the coming weeks here, and I'm sure they will have at least one before the August 11th primary. But there just hasn't been that much public polling on this race, and so we're left to overanalyze things like the straw poll or the internal poll from the Sarah Rodriguez campaign that I reported on, and so. I think you have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt. And I think primaries are tougher to poll because, you're really only polling half of the electorate in Wisconsin instead of the full, across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. And so if you're really just polling Democrats, it's a little bit more difficult to get that larger sample size of voters. But, at the recombobulation area, I write a breakdown of every new Marquette poll. So, stay tuned for that one as it comes, when it comes. We'll find out soon enough, I'm sure.
Yeah, and definitely not throwing shade at the Marquette poll because even us on this show, we've been trying to figure out, we want to have the candidates on, but who's still in the race,
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of recombobulation that can happen after the nomination papers in. We know who's final, Now, as we said, things are getting heated. So in what you saw from the forum, did anything stand out? Was there anything particularly notable from what the candidates shared or surprising?
Now that we are, kind of in crunch time for this, we're going to start seeing more ads. So last week, former Department of Administration Secretary Joel Brennan went up with a statewide TV ad. The following week, Kelda Roys went up with a TV ad. We've seen outside groups spending for Sarah Rodriguez's campaign and for backing David Crowley's campaign, the Milwaukee County executive. And so I would expect that to ramp up from, Mandela Barnes had some solid fundraising. Some of the other folks in the race, too. I know, State Representative Francesca Hong, who's had a really buzzy campaign over the past few months and has kind of gone from, a long shot wild card to a real contender in the race. I know, spent quite a bit on digital outreach early in the campaign. And that was, very much part of the strategy to boost name ID for a candidate that, is in Madison, in one of the bluest districts in the state, and wanting to, reach beyond that and build her name ID. And that's, I think, been a pretty successful strategy thus far, because she's now, put herself into real contention in this race. I don't think she or anyone would be considered a front runner or anything like that just yet. But I think that early investment in digital is really paying off. And I think it's translated into a lot of earned media. There are a lot of people paying attention to her campaign in a variety of different ways.
Getting on the cover of Time magazine, for instance. Getting
on the cover of Time, yeah. And I think, she's really just blowing up on social media in a lot of different ways. You're even seeing, some of the political adversaries of hers on the right, commenting on her campaign quite a bit, on Twitter, on various places on social media. So that's been interesting to see as well. So, taking a more unconventional approach, and so far seeing some strong results. But, I think some people wonder with her campaign too, if there's a lower ceiling, if there's maybe not as many, voters statewide who would be open to electing a Madison socialist as the nominee in the Democratic ticket in the first open race for governor in 16 years. So I think, some folks are calculating a little bit of risk that might come with that, certainly. But, it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out over the next couple months.
For sure. Well, we've got more governor's race updates to come, and we want to hear from you listening. Who do you think is leading in the race, and why? Or what questions do you still have about this primary? Let us know by texting or leaving us a voicemail on the CityCast Madison line. That's at 608-318-3367. We love hearing from you, for real. We know you have thoughts, and we'd love to include them in an upcoming mailbag segment. Let us know. Drop us a line, 608-318-3367. All right. Stay close, and we'll be right back. All right, we are back, and I want to dig into some of the issues here in the race. Talking about the Democratic primary candidates, they seem to agree on a lot of things from recent forums and debates, but there is at least one matter that has sparked some divide, which is data centers. Would you say data centers might be one of the defining issues of this primary, and what are the others?
Yeah, I do think this is emerging as a pretty significant issue for folks. And I think it's an issue that doesn't cut across traditional political lines, which I think makes it especially interesting. I think there are a lot of rural voters who might have backed Donald Trump or Ron Johnson or whoever in some recent election cycles that are, against data centers being built in rural areas. There are a lot of concerns with, the energy use. There are concerns with, how the state might be involved in, tax breaks or subsidies or whatever it might be with these types of projects. And I think we saw in some of the early Marquette polling on this issue is that you might see some similar kind of approve, disapprove on both Republicans and Democrats. I think there are a lot of voters who, are going to be opposed to the building of these, like the large scale AI data centers that are being proposed.
It really is so fascinating to see an issue like this that can bring folks across the aisle together, because I don't know if we've had one quite like this where people have lived experiences across the board in urban settings, in rural settings. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Very interesting. And I think because of how this primary is playing out, it's an issue that people are talking about. It's one that people are interested in. And at a recent forum that happened in Madison, the candidates were kind of given a yes or no question on, do you support a 1-year moratorium on new data center development? And only one candidate said yes. There were at least 6 candidates on stage answering this question, and only State Representative Francesca Hong said yes, that she supported a moratorium on data centers. And I think, this is an issue that can get a little tricky in Democratic political circles. I think there are a lot of unions and building trades who are very pro data center and want the construction jobs or other, union well-paying jobs that come with these construction issues. But I think there are a lot of folks that are also concerned about the environmental impact and just like the impact of big tech's incursion on our day-to-day lives, not just through our phones, but like with these being kind of a physical manifestation of that as well. So I thought it was fascinating that Hong was the only candidate who backed a moratorium and that none of the other candidates on stage there had that similar position. I think some of the candidates in their answers, talked about where they're at on the issues. And I think Kelda Roy's had an interesting kind of nuanced response about why she's very skeptical of data centers, but not for a moratorium. David Crowley had something similar on that too. And so it is one of those, if you get into the weeds, maybe you're going to find a more reasonable approach to that. But it also goes to that old adage about campaigning where if you're explaining, you're losing. And so,
right.
I think it's much easier to activate voters and get a reaction when you're saying, I'm for a data center moratorium, as opposed to just being like, well, I think there should be this, smart, nuanced approach to how we do data centers and can we do it right and whatever that might be. And I think that's, obviously important, but, a lot of people are just not going to look past the headline.
Yeah, it's that simple, like, yes, no, that visual too, that really stood out to folks. And especially in the digital sphere, it looked like, wow, Francesca Hong is really distinguishing herself from the others.
Yeah.
I appreciate you laying out too, like the complications with the different unions and just how that is an issue that can be complicated even there, because recognizing that the jobs tend to be more of an immediate boon, but in the long term, how that works out. Okay, enough about the Democrats. Let's turn to the Republicans. We only have two folks in their primary, but we have to remember Wisconsin is a deeply purple state, so they matter equally. The presumed Republican nominee at this point is U.S. Rep. Tom Tiffany. He got an endorsement from the president earlier this year. What's the status of that primary race?
Yeah, it's really just a primary in name only. It's Tom Tiffany who has, got the Trump endorsement. There was another Republican candidate of note running, Washington County Executive Josh Schoemann. The day Trump endorsed Tiffany, Schoemann dropped out of the race. And I think that tells you all you really need to know about where Republican voters are in Wisconsin. We saw the impact of a Trump endorsement in a bigger field in a number of different races in Wisconsin, including the primary for Congress in the 8th Congressional District in northeastern Wisconsin. Once Trump endorsed in that one, that candidate won, and now Tony Weed is a congressman. And so I think once Trump is going to endorse in that race, that was the primary as much as it would have been going to the voters in the primary. It's really a one-person primary, and that person is the president. And once that happened, Tom Tiffany became the presumptive nominee. And I think there's another individual in the race who, kudos to him for doing the work to make the ballot, but I would be shocked if he got more than like 1 or 2% in the race. I think it's just going to be Tom Tiffany cruising through to the nomination. He's already essentially running a general election type of campaign with his own campaign and some aligned groups already doing TV ads for his campaign. And, so I think this is going to be Tiffany versus, whoever emerges from the Democratic primary.
President Donald Trump visited Wisconsin, and I know all of the candidates had something to say about that. It is a moment to wonder like how a Trump endorsement will impact folks come November, in terms of polling and how popular the president is right now. It'll be like really fascinating to watch. And I don't know if you've been hearing anything from the candidates or from pollsters or just out and about where we're thinking about how a Trump endorsement will play in these midterms.
Yeah, I think it's, of course, really important for any Republican in the primary. But I also think, the history of a midterm election is just like it tends to be a little bit of a backlash against the party in power in the White House. I think that could be somewhat muted by the fact that Wisconsin doesn't have a federal statewide election this year. There's no Senate race. So there's a little bit of a complicating factor with that. But given that Tiffany is a member of Congress and he has voted with Trump, I think they said this a million times during the Democratic Party of Wisconsin's convention, he has a 100% voting record with Donald Trump since Trump returned to the presidency. And so there really has been absolutely zero daylight on any issue between Tiffany and Trump, not on tariffs, which I know Wisconsinites are very much against, not on, the war in Iran, which is not polling well in the state, and not on a number of other issues. And so Trump is not a popular president right now, and his numbers have been very down in states like Wisconsin. But, I think he is also a critical factor in driving turnout for a lot of voters. I think the way that the electorate has changed in the Trump era means some of the lower propensity voters who might not vote in every election, might not vote in, your city council race or school board or whatever, or a midterm election, are a little bit more likely to vote Republican, especially when Trump is on the ballot, than maybe 15 years ago. And conversely, some of the Democrats, the way that, kind of like the political realignment has unfolded, they are folks that are going to vote in every single election. We of course, see that from Dane County and Madison, perhaps more than any place, not just in the state, but in the country in terms of turnout. And so I think there are...
It's a whole personality.
Exactly.
It's a commitment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering about turnout, and it is somewhat Madison specific, is that how much is the fact that, this primary is happening on August 11th when students are not on campus? How is that going to impact turnout in a primary, particular for those of younger generations or first time voters or whatever it might be? Are there people who might not be as engaged because they're not on campus getting that kind of direct engagement from campaigns that you might otherwise see? I'm interested to see how that plays out, too.
That's a really good call, and probably true across the state.
Yeah.
Is there a word from Republicans on the Democratic candidates who they favor to run against?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that they all would love to have Tom Tiffany running in a statewide race against a Madison socialist like Francesca Hong. There was a story that the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel did a few months ago on Hong's campaign, and there was a leaked memo from the Tiffany campaign that say, hey, we need to start taking this candidate seriously and how that might impact the race. I think Republicans are tripping over themselves at the possibility of running against Francesca Hong. And, for as much as like the national environment, I think is going to favor Democrats in this year, I think they see a path for Tiffany going against Hong. And I think that could also be true of Mandela Barnes as well. I think the fact that he lost to Ron Johnson in 2022, perhaps gives Republicans some reason to believe that he could be beat again. And so I think there are going to be those electability questions about those, who might fare best. I think there are a lot of voters in Wisconsin who are just like, yeah, I like all 7 of these candidates. I'm ready to run through the wall for whoever emerges from the primary. Just give me whoever has the best chance to win.
Yeah, there's been a lot of folks coming, like, what do you think? Like, what's happening? What's happening?
Right. And I think, there are folks out there who say that, that any Democrat could beat Tom Tiffany this year. Tiffany is not a moderate by any stretch of the imagination, so that any Democrat who emerges from this field stands a good chance to win. There are folks that think Francesca Hong can't win. There are folks that think Mandela Barnes can't win. There are folks that think any of the other 5 candidates who are in the race, Missy Hughes, Kelda Roys, David Crowley, Sarah Rodriguez, and Joel Brennan, there are people who think any of those 5 would be favored against Tiffany pretty clearly as well.
Well, last question for you, Dan. This has been great. What are you watching for in the coming weeks and months?
I'm going to be interested to see, if some endorsements emerge for any of these candidates. I'm interested to see how, many of the candidates who did fundraise well, how they're going to spend that money in the final stretch here. As I said, I'm interested in kind of like the student vote aspect of this being in August and not being when school is in session, really. And so I'm interested to see how that is going to play out. I'm also really interested to see who might emerge beyond Hong and Barnes as, kind of the choice for folks who might be just, looking for that electability argument, looking for maybe a slightly more moderate candidate. And so I think, I'm really watching Rodriguez, Royce, and Crowley in particular to see if they can, make some noise here, get themselves into that top tier.
Well, Dan, you're asking all the right questions. This is exactly why we wanted you on. We'd love to have you back. Thank you for taking the time and bringing us this update on the governor's race.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope we were able to recombobulate a little bit here.
All right, we've got more election news coming up. Gubernatorial candidate Francesca Hong's current assembly seat here in Madison is up for grabs and hotly contested. Our team went to a recent candidate forum, and we've got the details, so stick around for that, and we'll be back with that story next. All right, we are back, and joining me for this segment is our very own producer, Jade Isiri Ramos. Jade, welcome back to the pod.
Hi, Bianca. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we are here to talk about the Wisconsin Assembly District 76 race. That's the district that gubernatorial candidate Francesca Hong currently serves in. Last week, the 5 Democratic candidates who are vying for the district participated in a public forum. You and our EP, Haley Sperling, went and attended the event to cover and report back. That's what we're going to do. Noting the event was put on by the Sassy Neighborhood Association, the Williamson Marquette Business Alliance, and Indivisible East Madison. You go, Kings and Queens. Before we dive deep into the content of this forum, high level, which parts of Madison does this district cover?
That's a great question. I had to pull up a map to really suss out what this district is, and I'm going to do my best to explain it to you. So the 76th district covers all of near East Madison out to Stoughton Road. And to the south, it cuts off at Cottage Grove Road. To the north, it runs all the way to the edge of Cherokee Marsh South. And I should note that it doesn't include the airport, but it does border the airport to the south and the west. And as you said, this is Rep. Hong's district. So if she's your representative, this is your district.
Now that we have the district bounds laid out, who are the candidates running?
There are 5 candidates running on the Democratic ticket. They are Isaiah Ben-Ami, who was most recently a Democratic legislative aide. He identifies as a Democratic socialist. Juliana Bennett, who is a former Madison alder and a chief of staff for a state lawmaker. She also identifies as a Democratic socialist. Tony Castaneda, who is a social worker and a WORT radio host. He identifies as a progressive. Dina Nina Martinez Rutherford, who is a Madison alder and a local comedian. She identifies as a socialist and a Democrat. And Zoe Sullivan, a freelance journalist, and she identifies as a Democratic socialist. And the Republican running for the seat, who will go up against whoever wins the Democratic primary, is Nina Chatt. And I should note that this district is a Democratic stronghold, with recent elections going to the Dems by more than 80%.
Yeah, and there are a lot of similarities we're hearing. Democratic Socialist, pretty similar traits and values to the predecessor or our current seat holder, Francesca Hong. How are these Democratic candidates who have so much in common trying to distinguish themselves?
Yeah, so like you said, there's a lot of overlap. And when it comes to their platform, that's very clear. They have a lot of things that they want that are similar. They have a lot of things that they support that are the same. But they do all have very different life experiences and professional backgrounds. So this forum last week was really an opportunity for the candidates to sell themselves to the voters. I will mention this again at the end, but I recorded 2 hours of this forum, and I'm going to link that in the show notes. So if folks are in this district and want to understand who these candidates are and how they are different from each other, there's a full opportunity to listen to that almost 2 hours of tape.
Yes, on the scene. Jade, we're doing the service. I'm so glad that you grabbed that, and glad for the segment, because we want to know what the main issues were that came up, if you can talk about that and give us some of the tape. What's on deck?
Yeah, so from my perspective, there are a few main issues that came up. They are housing, taxes, and data centers. Obviously, there's a lot more in that 2 hours than just those 3 things, but those really stuck out to me as the main issues on the table. So I'm going to start with housing, and this is Zoe Sullivan.
I think it's obvious that this is one of the issues where we all basically agree, right? We all want to get rid of the anti-tenant laws that passed under Walker. We all think that the shared revenue formula needs to be changed so that so that the city's getting the money it needs to get, and our taxes aren't going up because we're getting 18 cents of every dollar that we pay to the state.
Meanwhile, Ben-Ami really supports inclusionary zoning and the homestead credit expansion, which would give a refund to folks who are making less than $35,000 a year and hoping to keep more people in their home. Bennett wants to build more homes, and she wants to stop corporations from buying single-family units and wants to pass tenant protections. Meanwhile, Castaneda really focused on retirees and how they can stay in their homes.
One thing that I would like to do to relieve the pain on homeowners is that I think we need to implement a linkage fee. And that is a fee on developers, a one-time fee and a charge that they have to pay per square foot, be it $1 or whatever, that would go into our general revenues to help bring down the property taxes for people. And I also would like to see a freeze on property taxes for retirees, for all retirees and people on fixed income.
And Martinez Rutherford was one of the first candidates to mention addressing homelessness when talking about housing.
We need to be able to use every tool necessary to make sure that we're meeting this housing crisis head on. Every human deserves housing. That's why we need to also think about how the state is addressing homelessness. Currently, Madison's budget invests more in homelessness services than the entire state budget. I'm appalled by that. I'm angry about that. Because we still can't do all we need to do. And we know that it's more affordable to keep someone housed than have to rehouse them. That equates into more money into our budgets, into our pockets. When we care for the most vulnerable, it helps us.
So when we're talking about housing, property taxes are a big issue. What did candidates have to say about that?
Yeah, this was interesting. Everyone had the same stance of, we want to lower your property taxes. But interestingly, in the same breath, most of them said they want to fully fund public schools, which to me was an interesting, dichotomy, because so much of funding for schools come from our property taxes. The candidates want to raise income taxes for high earners. That's really how they're going to bridge the gap between being able to fully fund public schools and also lower your taxes.
So we've already established on the show that data centers are one of the biggest issues facing Wisconsin. Talked about that with Dan Schaefer. What did the candidates have to say about data centers and where they stand?
Yeah, I'll throw it straight to candidate Ben-Ami.
When it comes to data centers, we really need to be thinking about two things. We need to be thinking about how it impacts people and how it's going to impact our planet. It's quite clear that they can have negative impacts on our water supply, negative impacts on the amount of energy that needs to be done, and we're not nearly ready for the kind of utility usage that these hyperscale data centers have to offer. And we also have to make sure that we're protecting people. Like, these data centers have our data in them, and they can be accessed by these corporate oligarchs that are not sufficiently regulated.
Bennett has a specific piece of legislation that she's supportive of.
I am supportive of the socialist bill, Control-Alt-Delete, so that we have control locally over our public utilities, that any data center that wants to come to our communities provides a significant level of public good and creates alternative forms of energy usage, particularly that of renewable energy.
So that's what Ben-Ami and Bennett had to say about this issue, and all the candidates supported some kind of moratorium statewide on these larger data centers. Like I mentioned before, the forum was 2 hours long, so I have a lot more tape than what I shared here. And if you're curious to hear the whole thing, I'm going to publish that audio with a transcript, and I'll make sure to drop that link in the show notes of today's show, because if you are in the 76th Assembly District, we've got you.
We got you. So grateful that y'all could be on the scene. I know a tornado watch popped up as soon as you guys were sitting down, but you were already there. Heard it was well attended. Also heard from our EP, Haley Sperling. She'd posted on our socials saying, quote, "This might be the most polite political forum I've ever seen." Jade, before we wrap this segment, how did you think the forum went overall?
I think that's a really great characterization that Haley had. There were hugs given out at the end. There was one moment where the order of the candidates was Ben-Ami followed by Martinez Rutherford. And at the end of Ben-Ami's statement, people were still clapping. And Martinez Rutherford said, "Yeah, good job." It's just so very, very polite. And I think everyone really did a good job stating their case. And the moderator, Shali Pittman, halfway through the program asked folks if they didn't know who they were going to vote for before and now have an idea of who they were going to vote for. And a good handful of folks, raised their hands. So I think minds were made and hearts were won over.
Oh, I love it. And just so supportive. Like, you don't have to tear each other down. We can all live here and do a great job in community. Good on them. Good on you. Thanks for coming on the show, Jade, to bring us the update here. And yeah, I think that's it for today.
Yeah, thanks, Bianca.
That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm/Madison. And hey, if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with someone who's ready to vote? And also, speaking of voting, don't forget to vote for CityCast Madison for Best Local Podcast and Best Local News Website in the 2026 Best of Madison Awards. Y'all, your support means so much to us, and we want to win. Help us keep our title on the podcast, help us get that Best Local News Website, and definitely go vote for your other Madison favorites. Head to our show notes for a link to vote, and we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care, and thanks for listening.